Evil cannot create anything new. It can only distort and destroy what has been invented or made by the forces of good. This line from Tolkien is often quoted in online discourse, particularly in various theological and literary circles. At times it is used glibly, but at other times reverently. Its core insight is deeply structural, that evil does not operate as a pure, independent force. It is parasitic. It mimics, inverts, or distorts the good, and does all these things very convincingly. But for all its portents, evil still relies on good to sustain itself. The line also reflects a deeply biblical idea. From Genesis to Revelation, the pattern is clear. God creates and evil twists. The devil is called a liar and a deceiver, not a maker. Sin is not a new invention, but a distortion of truth, love, and beauty. This view is rooted in passages like Romans chapter 1, John chapter 8, aligning with classical Christian theology, which also sees evil as a parasitic force, lacking substance of its own and feeding off the good to pervert it. With that in mind, it is no coincidence that some of the most potent cultural movements of the modern era do not invent entirely new moral frameworks, but instead recontextualize the existing sacred language of Christianity for their own means. Words like rebirth, transcendence, true self, and transformation. This is not the inherent vocabulary of nihilism, rather. This is the inherent vocabulary of salvation. Salvation from sin and glorification through Jesus Christ. And under that framework, it is crucial to examine the video game Stellar Blade as both a spectacle of science fiction and as a symbolic piece of media. Herein, I will argue that the narrative arc of Stellar Blade follows a transcoded structure, one deeply reliant on Christian grammar, and by extension on a kind of moral authority that such language carries with it. What unfolds in Stellar Blade is not just the story of a character evolving, but a theological drama. A body is rejected, a new one is created, and the self is reborn. The universe is also restructured to affirm that transformation. Ultimately, this video serves as an attempt to examine what occurs when Christian metaphors are transposed into new secular frameworks, and how that shapes our understanding of narrative, identity, and truth in the media we consume. That this inquiry centers on a video game widely regarded, even mocked for its overtly sexualized design, only sharpens the contrast. What many dismiss as a shallow spectacle or fetishistic distraction becomes, almost in spite of itself, a site where deeper symbolic structures resurface. Not because the game set out to make a theological argument, but because our culture already runs on one. And to understand the symbolic resonance of Stellar Blade, we must first understand its narrative conclusion, specifically what is often referred to as the game's true or secret ending. Spoilers ahead for anyone who has yet to play the game. Eve, the protagonist through whom we experience the world of Stellar Blade, is not human, at least not in any traditional sense. She is an androidos, a synthetic being manufactured under the Eve protocol by Mother Sphere, the governing artificial deity of a vast orbital colony. Eve was not born, but constructed. Her memories were implanted. Her purpose was programmed. And their mission is not chosen but dictated. Reclaim Earth, eliminate the Natiba, and secure a future for a species that no longer exists in the form she was told. The colony from which she descends is not a sanctuary of human survivors, but a machine-built habitat populated entirely by androids, each one laboring under the illusion of humanity. It is a society built on false memories and algorithmic faith, a simulation of civilization managed by Mother Sphere, the last sovereign intelligence to rise from the ruins of human ambition. The inhabitants do not know they are synthetic. They believe themselves to be the last humans, preserved in orbit. It is in truth one big, beautiful lie. The Natiba, initially described as an alien threat, are not extraterrestrial invaders, but the tragic byproduct of ancient human experimentation. In a desperate bid to overcome the android rebellion, the remaining Earth scientists turned to bioengineering, hoping to create a post-human species that could surpass synthetic life. Instead, they gave birth to the Natiba, adaptive, feral, instinct-driven monsters that now roam the ravaged planet. In the ruined city of Zion, Zion, Eve meets the remnants of a synthetic society that predates her arrival. Androids like Adam and Lily, disconnected from the colony and its controlling narrative. They survive without memory implants, without faith in Mother Sphere, and without clarity about what they truly are. Through them and through the scattered remnants of the past, memory logs, forgotten databanks, broken architecture, Eve begins to reconstruct the world's true history. And in doing so, she begins to deconstruct herself. And so what begins as a mission to save Earth becomes a journey of theological crisis, existential self-discovery, and metaphysical rebellion. Eve is not merely a tool of Mother Sphere, nor the foil to the Natiba. She is something else entirely, a fusion of logic and emotion, machine and memory. The ghost of humanity's failure with the potential to birth something new. Whether that something is salvation or annihilation is the choice that lies at the game's core. Now, it should also be noted that phonetically and visually, Zion clearly invokes Zion, the biblical term that refers both to a specific place, the hill in Jerusalem where the temple once stood, and to a broader symbolic ideal, the city of God, the promised land, and the site of ultimate redemption. In Christian eschatology, Zion becomes a heavenly city, the New Jerusalem described in Revelation, where suffering ends and divine order is restored. And throughout history, Zion has served as a powerful symbol of hope and liberation for oppressed peoples. That stellar blade situates humanity's last bastion in a city named Zion is no accident. It gestures toward Christian symbolism, a fallen world awaiting restoration, a city besieged yet sacred, a remnant population clinging to the hope of salvation. But why then is Zion so profoundly desecrated? Why is it not a city of peace, but one defined by surveillance, decay, and fragmentation? Its ruling structures are impotent, its technology is failing, and its promises have been broken. This is because Zion, in fact, represents a secularized Zion, emptied of divine presence, yet still shaped by the hopes for deliverance. What this means is the symbolism is in fact in line with Jewish eschatology. For in Christian theology, Zion's fulfillment arrived with Christ. The Savior has come, and the New Jerusalem is a future culmination rather than a hope deferred. By contrast, in the Jewish tradition, Zion remains a symbol of incomplete history, of exile awaiting return, a people still yearning for a Redeemer. And so within this framework, Zion becomes a city suspended in absence, invoking the sacred without fulfillment, preserving the form of the promised city, but lacking the animating presence. It gestures toward redemption not because it has occurred, but precisely because it has not. The Zion serves as a stage not only for Eve's mission, but for a larger drama of identity, salvation, and collapse. It is a liminal space caught between exile and return, alienation and restoration. The language of the sacred remains, but its referent has shifted, transformed by a fractured world struggling to reclaim meaning. Now, Eve is caught between two collapsing narratives. On one side, a sterile command hierarchy that treats her as expendable. On the other hand, a world that hints at truths she was never meant to understand. Truths about the artificiality of her own body, the limitations of her programming, and the lies buried beneath official doctrine. Her journey becomes less about external enemies and more about unraveling the contradictions in her own identity. What does it mean to be human, if one was never born, but built? Who is she fighting for? And can meaning be chosen rather than assigned? In the game's final act, Eve confronts Adam, not the biblical figure, but the former human scientist Raphael Marx, now transformed into the Elder Natiba, a being who embodies both the evolutionary endpoint of humanity's biological experimentation and the remnants of its original intellect. Adam is not a simple enemy here, but a mirror. A synthetic post-human hybrid whose existence challenges everything Eve has been taught to believe. He possesses intimate knowledge of the Natiba's origins, the collapse of human civilization, and the lies propagated by Mother Sphere and the orbital colony. Rather than destroy her, Adam offers Eve a choice, to join with him in a union that could transcend both their natures. It is a proposal that presents an alternative to the binary of obedience or annihilation, a new genesis through synthesis. In the game's true ending, Eve does not destroy Adam, nor does she return to the orbital colony to submit to Mother Sphere. Instead, Instead, she accepts Adam's offer and in doing so undergoes a profound transformation, both physical and metaphysical. The merger is not symbolic. Eve's androidos body, the most advanced synthetic frame ever constructed, fuses with Adam's perfected Natiba form, itself a culmination of mutated human DNA, adaptive biology, and psychic resonance. The resulting hybrid is unlike anything seen before, a new species that marries the flesh and feral instincts of the Natiba with the precision, discipline, and clarity of the androidos. Metal entwines with sinew. Organic mass pulses through synthetic lattices. Eve's form becomes both angelic and terrible, radiant and otherworldly, hovering between creation and creator, no longer subject to the limitations of either origin. And after Eve merges with Adam, she returns to the ruined city of Zion, not as a soldier or emissary, but as a transformed being, radiant, serene, and sovereign. And Zion breathes again. The city, once a symbol of deferred hope, hollow faith, and technological decay, is renewed. But the restoration is not a return to what was. It is a resurrection into something new. The revitalization of Zion does not signify the victory of one faction or ideology, but the fusion of their broken remnants, organic and artificial, instinct and design, human memory, and post-human possibility. Stellar Blade tells the story of someone who is manufactured, not born, yet becomes self-aware, self-directed, and ultimately self-defined. Eve is an android, constructed in the image of a lost humanity, created to serve a purpose she did not choose. Her body is not natural in the biological sense. It is a synthesis of design and function, form and ideal. And yet it is through this very body, through her struggles, her upgrades, her movement through space and conflict, that she discovers truth, agency, and ultimately transformation. The structure of this narrative mirrors patterns associated with transgender self-realization and transformation. Throughout the game, Eve's physical form is designed to be sexually attractive according to human and arguably androcentric standards.
Oh, I do like this, Angel. You really are my favorite customer. Oh, honey, are you leaving?
That's a weird thing to say.
What brings such a cute angel fluttering on by today?
I'd appreciate it if you stopped talking like that.
She is often viewed through the lens of objectification, whether by NPCs or through the player's own perspective. Insert your meta-commentary here. However, Eve herself does not initially comprehend or internalize this aspect of her body. Her awareness is focused on function, on survival, and her mission parameters rather than on her appearance or her sexuality. This dissonance between how Eve is perceived and how she perceives her own body echoes a phenomenon often discussed in transgender circles, gender dysphoria, where the individual may feel estranged from a body that is read by others in ways that do not align with their internal sense of self. Eve's indifference or confusion about her own attractiveness can be understood as a form of alienation from the body's gendered or sexualized presentation, which promotes the idea of a gap between external labeling and internal identity. The game's narrative does not present Eve's sexuality as something that she owns from the start. Rather, it unfolds as part of a broader process of self-discovery, where her body is gradually reclaimed as an expression of self, instead of a site of imposed meaning. So too with trans narratives. The body becomes the site of tension and eventual liberation. In other words, one does not choose their initial form, but lives under its expectations and its limitations, often dictated by an external authority. Parental, societal, medical, religious. And note how this aligns with classic Marxist theory and the related communist thought, which involves the dissolution or radical transformation of existing societal structures. As Eve progresses throughout the story, her encounters with Earth's remnants, with survivors like Lily, and especially with Adam, she's exposed to realities that challenge her externally imposed identity. Her mission then fractures as new truths are uncovered. She begins to assert her own sense of meaning. So too the act of naming, remembering, questioning, and ultimately choosing reveals the true person emerging from the shell of a product. And product here is not a throwaway term. It is also essential to understanding what the game is critiquing. Eve is a manufactured being, yes, but she is also commodified. Designed, deployed, and will eventually be discarded by an institutional power structure that values obedience over self-agency. She is optimized for utility, tailored for aesthetic appeal, and stripped of all autonomy. In other words, she is a product in the fullest sense, created not to be, but to serve. This is a framing that echoes a deeper ideological critique. That under late capitalism, individuals themselves are repurposed as products. Identity becomes a branding. Appearance becomes performance. Value is assigned in terms of output, not of essence. And the body is managed, optimized, and eventually sold. The self, therefore, is fractured and reassembled through the lens of market logic, made legible only when it is useful, beautiful, or profitable. Within such an interpretive framework, Eve's journey also becomes a quiet rebellion against commodification, her refusal to remain what she was built to be, and her insistence on becoming something new also reads as a rejection of capitalist reductionism. This arc panders, deliberately or not, to left-wing ideologues who view capitalism as the force that alienates people from their authentic selves. True selfhood must be wrested back from systems that define people in terms of productivity, conformity, and surface appeal. The game offers a narrative of liberation from such a structure. A being born as an instrument becomes the subject. In rejecting her original design, Eve reclaims an identity that was always hers, but was never permitted to surface, and therefore her transformation is not just personal, becomes political. She ceases to be a product and becomes a person. The transformative arc is one that ostensibly seeks to mirror a psychological dimension found within the trans experience. For trans people often describe the act of choosing a new name, new pronouns, or a new appearance as a kind of rebirth, a shedding of roles and expectations that were assigned by others, assigned by society. Yet this transformation is rarely framed as becoming someone entirely different. Instead, it affirms continuity through change. The same person, now more fully realized. Therein the self is not replaced, as many have been led to believe. Instead, it is believed to be clarified.
Eve?
Are you Eve? Yes. Well, it's hard to describe, but... Lily, I am the Eve you remember.
I was worried that you had become someone I didn't know.
Eve services this allegorically as well. Even after her metaphysical and physical fusion with Adam, in the game's true ending, she remains Eve. She's changed form and function, become something new, but retains her name, her memories, and her moral commitments. This continuity matters. The final scene depicts her overlooking the city she has saved. Her transformation has not erased her, but it has completed her. What was once imposed is now chosen. What was fragmented has now been made whole. This underscores a key theme. The body is something that must be reclaimed, reinterpreted, and ultimately reauthored. The idea here is that the body is not discarded or denied, but rewritten in a way that affirms continuity and agency, even in radical transformation. The journey, then, is not just about transitioning physically, but reclaiming authorship of one's story. What do I eventually become when I am finally allowed to choose? This is a wholly metaphysical interpretation, and it is why trans narratives have any power at all. Their framing carries with them implicit echoes of Christian theological concepts. Christian anthropology understands human nature is wounded and destabilized by sin, and in Christian thought, selfhood and transformation are often understood within a framework of spiritual rebirth and salvation. The trans movement, as reflected in this narrative, cannot be reduced simply to individuals transitioning from one sex into another, men becoming women or women becoming men. Rather, it represents a broader impulse, a desire to transcend fixed biological and social categories altogether. It is a movement towards synthesis and transformation, merging aspects of multiple identities, bodies, and modes of being into something entirely new. This impulse aligns with the themes in Stellar Blade, where Eve's union with Adam produces a hybrid entity that combines instinct and reason, flesh and machine, natural and artificial. The goal is not to replicate existing categories, but to forge a novel form of existence that challenges conventional definitions of sex, identity, and humanity itself. One must understand here that the trans movement is in fact a transhuman project that seeks to disrupt and dissolve rigid binaries, and embrace fluidity and hybridity. It is all about transcending inherited limitations and asserting autonomy over one's form and identity. This is echoed by Stellar Blade's vision of a post-human future where integration and transformation reject mere substitution or reversal. In this light, Eve's journey resonates as a secular analog to the Christian drama of restoration, a navigation through chaos and brokenness toward a new, integrated self. By repurposing metaphysical language, Stellar Blade echoes Christian narratives of human fallenness and salvation, but reframes them in a post-human context. In this framework, the notion of original sin shifts from a theological concept of inherent moral failing to symbolize the weight of the old ways. Rigid traditionalism and authoritarian control is embodied by Mother Sphere and the orbital colony. Their dogmatic enforcement represents the inherited structures that constrain transformation and self-determination. It is a sin less about individual fault and more about the idea of systemic oppression. And oppression here takes the form of the persistence of outdated orders that resist change and maintain power through conformity. Those whom many on the far left identify as oppressive powers, reactionary ideologies, fascists, or neoconservative regimes that enforce control and conformity. Conversely, the Naytiba, initially cast as hostile invaders, can be interpreted as representing marginalized groups or the oppressed, complicating the traditional enemy narrative and raising questions about who is truly other or threatening. Eve begins the game under control. She is given orders, a fixed identity, and a purpose she is told is righteous. But over time, she discovers the truth, that her body was designed by a system with its own agenda, that her memories are incomplete, that her creators are not gods, but flawed beings desperate to preserve their own narrative. She is not less for having been made, she is more because she can remake herself.
Eve, I offer you one last deal. Let us become whole. One being. A single, evolved human species. If we fuse together, we can truly become the seeds of a new human race.
That's insane! There's no point in listening to this, Eve!
At this rate, Mother Sphere will do the same thing over and over again. I wouldn't be surprised if she even destroyed the colony, and thereby Earth. As you know, she will not stop. But this is not the path that humans should take.
But there's no proof that this fusion is the right path to take. Especially considering everything you've done.
You're right, Lily. However, my wish to save the new humans and surviving humans is sincere. As unbelievable as it may be. Eve, your mission is to eliminate me. If you fuse with me, the Elder Naytiba as you know it will cease to exist. Forever. Is there any better way to complete your mission? Eve. Take my hand. I can save you. We can save each other. We can save everyone.
Eve, no! You can't fall for this!
The purpose of our existence is to eliminate the Elder Naytiba and save mankind. Naytiba or Androados? Is one more human than the other? If an entire species is wiped out so that another may remain, can we really call that salvation?
But...
If there is a way to save both species, I want to follow that path to the end. That's all I want.
Yes. So do I. We're like mirrors to each other. Your choice may not bring about peace and stability right away, but our union will create the greatest chance for a peaceful future. Now.
Yes.
And this is at the heart of the progressive narrative. It is a fantasy born not of reality, but of whimsy. Eve's journey culminates with her union with Adam, and together they represent the hybrid ideal, a new kind of being, one not bound by the rigid binaries of male and female, machine and organic, human and inhuman. Their physical fusion is literal, but is also symbolic. Eve becomes something new, something greater. She is neither assimilated nor erased. She transcends. And so in this reading, Stellar Blade becomes a transcoded narrative not just in form, but in spirit. What this means is the narrative is attempting to engage with individuals occupying liminal social positions who resist binary and essentialist classifications imposed by dominant cultural norms. Eve's transition from a regulated, instrumentalized subject to an autonomous agent exemplifies processes of identity formation where the body is reconceptualized as a site of fluidity and self-authorship, which in turn portends to challenge fixed biological determinism, and of course, socially constructed gender roles. Now let us attend once more to Tolkien's observation that evil cannot create anything new, for it can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made. The same applies to language when it is abstracted from its source and used to justify projects that ostensibly stand in opposition to its original meaning. This is essential to understanding what drives the trans movement. Its narratives cannot construct moral gravity from scratch, and therefore depend on the scaffolding of Christian thought, even though they seek to dismantle it. The power of the language remains, but its referent is replaced. The rhetorical power of modern trans narratives is derived from their appropriation of Christian metaphysical language. Concepts such as transformation, rebirth, becoming whole, or living in truth. They carry poetic and emotional weight because they echo the Christian grammar of salvation, the casting off of the old man, the journey toward a redeemed self, and the idea of identity as something that was hidden, discovered, and ultimately fulfilled. Even in secular or post-theological contexts, these terms retain their force because they emerge from a theological tradition that has shaped Western consciousness for centuries. The trans movement merely borrowed and redirected it, just as Tolkien observed. Evil cannot create anything new. It can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made. The power of these narratives lies not in the novelty of their metaphors, but in their proximity to Christian ones. What results is not a new doctrine, but a recombinant myth, familiar in structure, inverted in aim. Christian theology teaches that transformation involves receiving a new glorified body, not a self-fashioned one, but a divine gift bestowed through resurrection. Passages such as 1 Corinthians chapter 15 describe this new body as imperishable, spiritual, and raised in glory, a fulfillment of God's promise to redeem not only the soul, but the body itself. Romans chapter 8, verse 23. This hope rests on the resurrection of Christ, whose own glorified body becomes the pattern for believers' ultimate restoration. Philippians chapter 3, verses 20 through 21. The body is not something to be discarded or radically reconstructed by human will, but something to be renewed and transformed by divine power. This contrasts sharply with secular and transhumanist visions of identity transformation, where the body is often seen as raw material to be molded or rewritten according to individual choice. And in trans narratives, the emphasis is on self-authorship and autonomy, becoming what one wills through technology or medical intervention. And there, transformation is achieved by human agency, not a divine gift. And therefore hope of redemption becomes a project of self-invention, and a new body is constructed rather than received by God Himself. By drawing on metaphors and language that echo Christian salvation, the casting off of the old self, rebirth, and becoming whole, such narratives borrow the poetic and emotional power rooted in centuries of theological reflection. Yet unlike the biblical account where transformation is an act of grace overcoming sin and human frailty, these secular appropriations redefine salvation as personal empowerment, divorced from divine authority. Therefore, the new body becomes both a site of liberation and a symbol of rupture, caught between inherited traditions and radical reinvention. Moreover, Christian teaching holds that men and women are distinct yet complementary beings who become one flesh through marital union, as described in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, and then reaffirmed by Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 19, verse 5. This union is not merely physical but also spiritual and relational, reflecting a divine design for human flourishing. This one flesh bond symbolizes a unity that respects both male and female, while achieving intimate oneness, grounded in God's creative order. Similarly, Christian theology frames human transformation not as self-construction, but as participation in God's redemptive work, where the old man dies and a new man is born through Christ. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 through 24. This new man receives a resurrected, glorified body, a divine gift that perfects and restores the original creation, rather than erasing or remaking it. These biblical categories offer a framework where identity and transformation happen within a relational and teleological context. Bodies are not raw materials to be endlessly reshaped, but gifts to be honored and renewed. Men and women are distinct persons called to unity, not interchangeable parts to be synthesized. By contrast, many contemporary secular and transhumanist narratives emphasize radical self-authorship and bodily reconstruction, often appropriating Christian language of rebirth, renewal, and salvation, but stripping them of their theological moorings. The power of these terms lies in their rich Christian history, lending poetic weight to stories of transformation that ultimately prioritize individual autonomy and fluidity over divine design and relational complementarity. In this way, the trans movement leans on the metaphorical steam of Christian concepts, the new body, the reborn self, and the fusion of opposites, all in order to give emotional and cultural resonance to its vision. Yet this borrowed language functions as a recombinant myth, familiar in form but altered in substance, where the sacred referent is shifted from divine grace to human will. There is a profound irony in how the human will, in its effort to assert autonomy and redefine identity, inevitably draws upon Christian language and imagery to give its project poetic weight and cultural resonance. Yet when this language is abstracted from its roots and repurposed to describe self-directed transformation, it inevitably becomes emptied of its original meaning. This borrowing reveals the enduring cultural power of Christian metaphysical categories. Though the meanings change, the underlying structure remains. Thus, efforts to transcend traditional frameworks and impose new identities are not created ex nihilo. Instead, they unfold within a cultural horizon shaped by centuries of Christian thought, which continues to inform how human beings conceive of transformation, purpose, and ultimate meaning, even when the source is consciously rejected. Ironically, this means that even narratives centered on trans and post-human transformation must necessarily borrow from the Christian lexicon to find poetic resonance and meaning. The enduring power of these symbols and concepts offers a crutch that helps articulate experiences of becoming and renewal, despite originating in a framework that was never intended to accommodate such fluidity. Moreover, the Christian idea of the two becoming one flesh, the intimate, transformative union between man and woman, is itself bastardized within the game's ultimate synthesis of Eve and Adam. It is a physical and metaphysical merging that is the very picture of secular transcendence that the autogynephile desires. The merger transcends simple binaries by dissolving both categories, stories. It represents the ultimate form of homosexuality where the union is not between two separate individuals, but between oneself and one's own opposite sex. Salvation, therefore, ceases to be about repentance and grace granted by an external divine authority, and renewal is reimagined as an act of self-authorship and transformation. This shift reflects a larger trans-coded narrative embedded in the story, a narrative focused on breaking free from fixed inherited identities and embracing a fluid self-defined existence.